You know, I was sitting in a very important business meeting last month. Actually, I shouldn't say I was sitting in it, I was observing it, because they had invited me to see how their leadership team makes decisions. And there was this one executive, let's call him Amit, who had prepared extensively for this meeting. He had charts, he had data, he had statistics, he had everything you could possibly need to make his point. And the moment the meeting started, he began talking and talking and talking some more. He interrupted others to add his points. When someone else was speaking, you could see him just waiting, literally vibrating with the need to jump in with his perspective. He had an answer for everything, a counterpoint to every argument, a story to match every story, and I watched as one by one the other people in that room just checked out. They stopped listening. They started looking at their phones, their body language changed, and by the end of that 2-hour meeting, Amit had spoken for probably 90 minutes of it. He had made every point he wanted to make. He had won every argument, but you know what? He lost the room, he lost the respect, he lost the decision. The CEO chose to go with someone else's proposal, someone who had spoken for maybe 10 minutes in total. But when they spoke, everyone listened. And as I was leaving that building, walking to my car, I couldn't stop thinking about what I had just witnessed. Here was a brilliant man, genuinely talented, genuinely knowledgeable, who had essentially defeated himself with his own mouth. It was like watching someone score goal after goal in their own net, and I thought to myself, how many of us are doing this? How many of us are talking ourselves out of success? How many of us believe that speaking more means winning more, when actually the opposite is true? See, we live in a world that's obsessed with speaking. We celebrate the loud voice, the quick comeback, the person who always has something to say. Our entire education system rewards those who speak up in class. Our workplaces promote people who are vocal in meetings. Social media has turned everyone into broadcasters, constantly sharing opinions, constantly commenting, constantly adding their voice to every conversation. We've created a culture where silence is seen as weakness, where not speaking up is interpreted as not having anything valuable to contribute. But here's what I've discovered in my years of spiritual practice, in my years of counseling people, in my years of simply observing human behavior. The most powerful people in any room are often the ones speaking the least. The wisest decisions come from those who listen more than they talk. The deepest connections are formed not through endless conversation, but through comfortable silence. When you stop talking, you don't stop winning, you start winning. You start winning in ways you never imagined possible. Now, I know what some of you might be thinking. But Gaur Gopal Das, we need to speak up. We need to share our ideas. We need to make our voices heard. If we stay silent, how will anyone know what we think? How will we influence anything? How will we make an impact? And these are valid questions. I'm not here to tell you to become mute. I'm not suggesting you take a vow of silence and never speak again. That's not the point at all. What I'm talking about is something much more nuanced, much more powerful. I'm talking about strategic silence. I'm talking about intentional listening. I'm talking about understanding that communication is not a competition, it's a collaboration. And in any collaboration, knowing when not to speak is just as important as knowing what to speak. Sometimes your silence is your strength. Sometimes your restraint is your power. Sometimes the words you don't say are more impactful than the words you do say. Let me take you back to something that happened in my own life many years ago before I took sannyas. I was in college and I was that person who always had to have the last word. In every debate, in every discussion, in every argument with friends I had to win. I had to prove my point. I had to make sure everyone knew I was right. And I thought this made me strong. I thought this made me intelligent. I thought this made me a leader. But there was this one professor, Professor Sharma, who taught philosophy, and he had this strange habit. In class discussions, he would often just sit back and say nothing for long periods. Students would debate, argue, get heated, and he would just observe. And then, when everyone had exhausted themselves, when all the loud voices had said everything they wanted to say, he would speak. And when he spoke, everyone listened, not because he was loud, not because he interrupted, but because his silence had created space, had created anticipation, had created respect. One day, after class, I asked him, "Sir, why don't you speak more? You know so much. Why do you let us go on and on with our half-baked ideas?" And he smiled and said something I will never forget. He said, "Beta, when you're constantly talking, you're only repeating what you already know. But when you're listening, you're learning what you don't know. And more importantly, when you learn to be comfortable with silence, you learn to think clearly. Most people don't think and then speak. They speak to think, and that's why most people say things they later regret." That conversation changed something in me. It planted a seed that took years to fully grow, but it changed my entire perspective on communication, on relationships, on life itself. Because you see, talking is easy. Any fool can talk. Any fool can have an opinion. Any fool can give advice. But listening, true listening, that requires strength, that requires patience, that requires ego death. And silence, strategic silence, that requires wisdom most people spend their entire lives not acquiring. Now let me tell you why this matters so much in our current world. Why this is not just good advice, but essential wisdom for survival and success in the 21st century. We are living in the noisiest time in human history. Think about it. From the moment we wake up to the moment we sleep, we are bombarded with noise. News channels screaming at us, social media notifications pinging constantly, people talking at us from every direction, advertisements shouting for our attention, messages flooding our phones. Everyone wants to be heard. Everyone is fighting for attention. Everyone is trying to speak louder than everyone else. And in this chaos, we've lost something precious. We've lost the ability to be still. We've lost the ability to simply be present without needing to add our commentary to everything. We've lost the art of observation, the practice of contemplation, the power of silence. We've become a society of talkers who have forgotten how to listen, of speakers who have forgotten how to think, of broadcasters who have forgotten how to receive. And the cost of this? Oh, the cost is staggering. I see it everywhere I go. I see relationships breaking down because people are so busy talking past each other that they never actually hear each other. I see talented professionals stuck in their careers because they're so focused on making their voice heard that they miss crucial information others are trying to share. I see parents and children growing apart because everyone is talking at each other, but no one is truly listening to each other. I see leaders making terrible decisions because they're surrounded by people who only tell them what they want to hear, and they themselves talk so much they never create space for honest feedback. Let me tell you about a CEO I met. Let's call him Vikram. Brilliant businessman, built his company from scratch, incredibly successful by every external measure. But he came to me because his company was struggling, his best people were leaving, his board was losing confidence in him. His family was distant, and he couldn't understand why. He said to me, "I communicate constantly. I have daily meetings with my team. I'm always available. I share my vision repeatedly. Why is everything falling apart?" So I did something unusual. I asked if I could shadow him for a week, just observe, and what I saw was fascinating and tragic. In every single meeting, Vikram spoke for 80% of the time. When his team members tried to share concerns, he would interrupt with solutions before they finished explaining the problem. When his wife tried to talk to him about family issues, he would immediately start giving advice without fully hearing what she was saying. When his children wanted to share their day, he would quickly relate it back to his own experiences and then dominate the conversation with his story. This man wasn't communicating, he was broadcasting, and there's a huge difference. Communication is a two-way street. Broadcasting is just talking at people, and you know what broadcasting does. It creates distance. It creates resentment. It creates disconnection. People stop trying to reach you because they know you're not really available, you're just waiting for your turn to talk. I sat Vikram down and asked him a simple question. In the last week, what's one thing you learned about what your team is really thinking? What's one thing you discovered about what your wife truly needs? What's one insight you gained into your children's actual life? And he sat there and he couldn't answer, not because he wasn't intelligent, not because he didn't care, but because he had been so busy talking that he had stopped learning, he had stopped growing, he had stopped connecting. This is the problem so many of us face. We've confused activity with progress. We think that talking more means communicating better. We think that speaking up in every meeting means we're being valuable. We think that always having an opinion means we're being engaged. We think that never backing down from an argument means we're being strong. But actually, what we're doing is isolating ourselves. We're creating barriers with our words. We're pushing away the very things we're trying to attract: respect, connection, influence, success. And here's the irony: the more we talk without purpose, the less people listen. Have you noticed this? When someone talks all the time, eventually their words lose meaning. It's like the boy who cried wolf. When everything is urgent, nothing is urgent. When you comment on everything, your comments mean nothing. When you have a strong opinion on every topic, people stop valuing your opinions on any topic. You become noise, and noise is easily tuned out. In our scriptures, there's this beautiful concept of mauna, silence. But it's not just about not speaking. It's about creating space, space for wisdom to emerge, space for others to express themselves, space for the divine to be heard. Our rishis understood something profound, that in silence we connect with something deeper than our own thoughts. In silence, we access wisdom that's not available when our minds are constantly chattering. In silence, we become receptive instead of just reactive. Lord Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita doesn't speak until Arjuna has completely emptied himself of his confusion, his doubts, his fears. Krishna listened, he created space, and when he spoke, his words changed the course of history. Buddha sat in silence under the Bodhi tree and gained enlightenment. Jesus went to the desert for 40 days of silence before beginning his ministry. Every great spiritual tradition understands this truth. Real power comes not from constant speaking, but from knowing when to speak and when not to. But we don't need to be spiritual masters to apply this wisdom. We need it in our daily lives, in our relationships, in our work, in our families. So let me share with you how we can start winning by talking less, how we can become more influential by being more silent, how we can create deeper connections by creating more space. The first and most important solution is this: learn to listen with the intent to understand, not with the intent to respond. Most of us, when someone else is speaking, we're not really listening. We're waiting for our turn. We're formulating our response. We're thinking about what we're going to say next. We're judging what they're saying, agreeing or disagreeing in our minds. But we're not truly hearing them. We're not trying to see the world from their perspective. We're not attempting to understand their experience, their emotions, their truth. True listening is an act of love. It's an act of service. When you truly listen to someone, you're giving them the most precious gift you can give, your complete attention. You're saying without words, in this moment, you matter more than my own thoughts. Your experience is valuable to me. I respect you enough to fully receive what you're offering. And people feel this. They feel when you're truly present with them versus when you're just physically present but mentally elsewhere. Here's a practice I want you to try. For the next conversation you have, whether it's with your spouse, your child, your colleague, your friend, commit to this. You will not interrupt. You will not plan your response while they're talking. You will not immediately relate their story back to your own experience. You will simply listen, watch their face, notice their emotions, try to feel what they're feeling, and only when they're completely finished, when they've said everything they need to say, only then will you respond. And here's what will happen. That person will feel heard in a way they rarely feel heard, and they will trust you more. They will open up more. They will value you more, not because of what you said, but because of how you listened. The second solution is learning to pause before speaking. This is so simple, yet so powerful. Before you jump into a conversation, before you give your opinion, before you offer your advice, pause. Take a breath. Ask yourself, is what I'm about to say necessary? Is it kind? Is it helpful? Is this the right time? Is this the right way to say it? And sometimes the answer will be no, and that's okay. In fact, that's wisdom. I've learned over the years that some of my best contributions to conversations have been the comments I didn't make, the corrections I didn't offer, the arguments I didn't engage in, the advice I didn't give. Because by staying silent, I allowed the conversation to go where it needed to go naturally. I allowed others to arrive at insights on their own. I allowed people to feel respected and trusted rather than controlled and corrected. There's a beautiful saying, a wise man speaks because he has something to say. A fool speaks because he has to say something. Learn to be the wise man. Speak when you have something valuable to contribute, not just because there's a gap in the conversation that makes you uncomfortable. The third solution is mastering the art of the strategic question. Instead of telling people what you think, ask them what they think. Instead of jumping in with your experience, ask them about theirs. Instead of correcting them, ask them questions that help them think more deeply. Questions are powerful because they engage people. They make people think. They show respect. They create connection. For example, in meetings, instead of immediately sharing your idea, try asking, what approaches have we considered so far? Or what do others think about this? You'll be amazed at what emerges. Often, someone else will say something similar to what you were thinking, and you can build on it rather than competing with it. Or you'll hear perspectives you hadn't considered, and your own thinking will improve. Or you'll notice gaps in the discussion that you can then address more effectively. With your family, instead of telling your children what to do, ask them, what do you think would be the best choice here? Instead of lecturing your spouse about something they did wrong, ask, help me understand what happened from your perspective. Questions create dialogue. Statements create monologue. Dialogue connects. Monologue separates. The fourth solution is learning to be comfortable with silence. This is perhaps the hardest one because we've been conditioned to believe that silence is awkward, that gaps in conversation need to be filled, that quiet means something is wrong. But actually, silence is where the magic happens. Silence is where people process. Silence is where they reflect. Silence is where they feel safe enough to share what they're really thinking. When you ask someone a meaningful question, don't rush to fill the silence if they don't answer immediately. Let them think. Let them find their words. Some of the most profound conversations I've had included long silences where both of us were just sitting together, thinking, processing, being present. Those silences were more meaningful than 1,000 words could have been. In professional settings too, silence is powerful. After you make a proposal, be silent. Let others react. After someone shares an idea, pause before responding. Let the idea breathe. Let others add to it. The person who's comfortable with silence controls the conversation more than the person who fills every gap with words. The fifth solution is practicing gratitude for what you hear rather than eagerness for what you want to say. When someone shares something with you, instead of immediately jumping to your response, take a moment to appreciate what they shared. Say thank you for sharing that, or I appreciate you opening up, or that's an interesting perspective I hadn't considered. This does two things. It makes the other person feel valued, and it gives you a moment to really absorb what was said before reacting. So often we miss the gifts people are offering us because we're too busy preparing our own offering. Someone shares a struggle, and instead of receiving their vulnerability as a gift of trust, we immediately launch into advice mode. Someone shares good news, and instead of celebrating with them, we make it about us by sharing our own achievement. Someone shares an idea, and instead of exploring it, we immediately critique it or offer our alternative. We're so focused on contributing that we forget to receive, and truly receiving what others offer is itself a profound contribution. Now, here's what I want you to commit to, starting right now, not tomorrow, not next week, but from this very moment. These are practices that will transform your relationships, your career, your entire life if you commit to them seriously. First commitment, the 60-second rule. Before you speak in any important conversation with your family, in meetings, with friends, wait 60 seconds after the other person finishes speaking. Just 60 seconds. Count them if you have to. In those 60 seconds, process what was said. Consider multiple interpretations. Notice your own emotional reaction. Let your impulse to immediately respond settle down, then speak. You'll be amazed at how much more thoughtful, how much more impactful your words become when they come from consideration rather than reaction. Second commitment, the one-sentence response. Practice responding to things in one clear, concise sentence first. Not a paragraph, not a 5-minute explanation, one sentence. See if that's enough. Often it is, and if more is needed, the other person will ask. But by starting with brevity, you force yourself to clarify your thinking. You identify what's truly essential, and you create space for dialogue rather than dominating with monologue. I've seen executives transform their leadership by doing this. Instead of explaining every decision in exhaustive detail, they share the decision clearly and concisely, then ask if anyone has questions. Instead of long emails with multiple paragraphs, they write 3 clear sentences. Their communication becomes more powerful because it's more focused. People actually read their emails. People actually absorb their messages. Less is more. Third commitment, the listening log. For 1 week, I want you to keep a simple journal. Each day, write down one thing you learned from listening to someone, not something you taught them, not some insight you shared, something you learned from them. This practice forces you to actively listen with the intent to learn. And what you'll discover is that everyone has something to teach you if you're willing to learn. Your child can teach you about wonder. Your elderly parent can teach you about resilience. Your colleague can teach you about perspectives you haven't considered. But only if you listen, only if you stop talking long enough to receive their wisdom. Fourth commitment, the question challenge. For 1 full day, Try to communicate primarily through questions rather than statements. Instead of saying, "I think we should," ask, "What if we considered?" Instead of "You should," ask, "Have you thought about?" Instead of "The problem is," ask, "What do you see as the main challenge here?" This practice will feel awkward at first. You'll catch yourself wanting to just tell people what you think, but push through that discomfort, because what you'll discover is that questions empower people, questions engage people, questions create collaboration rather than resistance. Fifth commitment, the silence practice. Once a day, find 10 minutes to just be silent. Not sleeping, not watching TV, not scrolling through your phone. Just sitting in silence. No input, no output, just being. This might be the hardest commitment of all, because we're so addicted to constant stimulation, constant noise, constant distraction. But in that silence, you'll reconnect with yourself. You'll hear your own thoughts clearly. You'll notice things you've been too busy to notice, and gradually you'll become more comfortable with silence in conversations too. Sixth commitment, the apology practice. Think of 3 times in the recent past where you talked too much, where you interrupted someone, where you dominated a conversation, where you gave advice without being asked, where you made it about you when it should have been about someone else. And apologize. Actually go to those people and say, "I realize I didn't really listen to you. I was so busy trying to be heard that I didn't hear you. I'm sorry. Can we have that conversation again? And this time, I promise to truly listen." This takes humility. This takes courage, but it transforms relationships. It shows people you're growing, you're learning, you're changing, and it gives you a chance to rebuild connections you may have damaged with your words. Seventh commitment, the gratitude practice. Each evening, identify 3 moments during the day where someone else spoke and you're grateful you listened instead of interrupted. Maybe your spouse shared something about their day and you actually heard their emotion, not just their word. Maybe your team member raised a concern and instead of dismissing it, you explored it. Maybe your child wanted to tell you a story and instead of rushing them, you gave them your full attention. Write these down. Celebrate them, because what we appreciate, we amplify. The more you notice the benefits of listening, the more you'll practice it. And here's the beautiful thing about all these commitments. They don't require you to change who you are. They just require you to be more intentional about how you communicate. You're not becoming weak or passive. You're becoming strategic and powerful. You're not losing your voice. You're making your voice matter more by using it more carefully. Let me share one final story before we close. There's this ancient story about a king who was known as the wisest ruler in all the land. People would come from far and wide to seek his counsel. And here's what amazed everyone. He never rushed to judgment. He never interrupted. He never imposed his view. He would listen to every person completely. He would ask thoughtful questions. He would sit in silence, considering all angles, and only then, sometimes hours or even days later, would he speak his wisdom. And when he spoke, people listened because they knew his words came from deep consideration, not hasty reaction. One day, a younger king visited him and asked, "How did you become so wise? What's your secret?" And the wise king smiled and said, "Every time I'm tempted to speak, I ask myself 3 questions. Is it true? Is it necessary? Is it kind? And if the answer to all 3 is yes, then I speak. But I've discovered that most things I want to say don't pass all 3 tests, so I stay silent, and in that silence wisdom grows. This is what I'm inviting you into, not silence for the sake of silence, but intentional, strategic, powerful silence that creates space for wisdom, for connection, for real influence. Because here's the truth that our culture doesn't want you to know. You don't need to be the loudest to be heard. You don't need to speak the most to matter the most. You don't need to win every argument to win at life. In fact, the opposite is true. When you stop trying to be heard all the time, people start actually hearing you. When you stop trying to win every point, you start winning trust. When you stop talking so much, you start learning so much. When you give others space to shine, you don't diminish, you expand. When you listen more than you speak, you don't lose influence, you gain it in ways that last, in ways that matter, in ways that transform. The most respected people I know are not the ones who always have something to say. They're the ones who say something when they have something meaningful to contribute. The most trusted leaders are not the ones who dominate meetings. They're the ones who create space for every voice to be heard. The strongest relationships are not built on constant conversation. They are built on moments of deep connection where both people feel truly seen and heard. So as you leave here today, as you go back to your lives, your families, your work, your communities, I want you to remember this. Your words are powerful. Use them wisely. Your attention is precious. Give it generously. Your silence is not weakness. It's strength. When you stop talking, you don't stop mattering. You start mattering in ways that create real, lasting impact. Stop trying to prove you're the smartest person in the room. Start being curious about what you can learn from everyone else in the room. Stop racing to be heard. Start making space for others to express themselves. Stop filling every silence with words. Start appreciating silence as a gift, as a teacher, as a friend. Stop talking to win arguments. Start listening to build bridges. Because at the end of your life, no one will remember how many arguments you won. No one will celebrate how many times you proved you were right. No one will say, "They talked so much. We really miss hearing their voice." But people will remember if you made them feel heard. People will remember if you gave them space to be themselves. People will remember if you were present with them, truly present, in the moments that mattered. When you stop talking, you start winning. You win respect. You win trust. You win deep connections. You win clarity of mind. You win wisdom. You win influence that lasts beyond your words. You win peace in your relationships. You win opportunities you couldn't see when you were busy broadcasting. You win the life you actually want, not just the life you talk about wanting. This is my invitation to you. This is my challenge to you. And this is my promise to you. If you commit to these practices, if you embrace strategic silence, if you become an intentional listener, your life will transform, not overnight, not magically, but steadily, surely, profoundly. So go now with this wisdom. Go and listen more than you speak. Go and ask more than you tell. Go and create space rather than filling space. Go and be present rather than just being verbal. Go and discover the power that comes not from having the last word, but from creating space for others to find their own words. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for your openness. Thank you for being willing to consider that maybe, just maybe, the path to winning isn't through speaking louder, but through listening deeper. May you find the courage to embrace silence. May you discover the wisdom that emerges when you stop talking. And may your life be blessed with the deep connections, the real influence, and the lasting peace that comes when you understand this simple truth. When you stop talking, you start winning. Thank you.